Okay, I think we are looking good. So first, thank you to everyone for your interest in participating today. As you all know, this is a very important step in what we're trying to do to move the Michigan wine industry forward. This is our fourth town hall addressing particular funding, potential funding mechanisms. And so who we have with us today is Dakota Baker from Senator John Damoose's office in the north. But I think what we'll kind of discuss today will be relatable to all districts in the state of Michigan, and we'll have the ability to apply things that we learned here today to everyone that's involved. So thank you for coming. I will say we will try to have questions managed. So if you do have a question for Dakota, please put it into the chat. We will save those nearing the end, and I will ask these questions in order that they are entered into the chat. And if we find that there's some, similar questions, we'll try to group those together. Otherwise, thanks for coming, Dakota. How about an introduction of who you are and who you work with, and let's start there.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Brian, for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and speak to you guys today. When I shared this sort of invitation with my boss directly, I work for Senator John Damoose. He really wanted to join in and actually be the one speaking to you guys today. But as I'm sure a lot of you are aware, they are in the middle of a very heavy budget week. And today's the session we expect. They're on the floor currently, and we expect that they'll be there quite late. So I got the opportunity to jump in front of you guys today and talk a little bit, try to clarify some of the kind of ins and outs of, from my perspective, I suppose, on how policy change, appropriations, any of that stuff moves through Lansing and how to best approach some of those practices. So a little bit of background about myself and the senator. He and I have been together off and on for a number of years now, since he took office in 2021 as a state rep. I worked some campaigns prior, joined up with Senator Damoose. I was stolen by the congressman from up north, Congressman Bergman. I worked for him for a few years. And then Senator Damoose took me back when he won the Senate seat last year, and I've been with him since and plan to stay with him for the foreseeable future. So we have a good time together. We work hard, and we're really blessed to represent one of, in our opinion, we obviously have the best district, Senate district in Michigan. We're biased, we know it, but we're happy to be proud of it. So this is a great industry. I'm really thrilled to see all the interest and happy to answer your questions today. Happy to talk and just give you as much perspective as I can as someone who's not an expert on the wine industry. We certainly understand its value, but I don't have a ton of background specifically in what you guys will have. So really excited to hear from you about the ins and outs and how we can help, how we can support the efforts that you're putting in to benefit the wine industry in the state.
Thank you, Dakota. So to give you a kind of an overview of what we've been discussing, there's a few paths that we've discussed both legislatively and organizationally. The overall goal is to fund three buckets, essentially. We want to find some opportunity for research, some for education, and some for marketing. And there's several discussions that you may or may not be aware of that are happening within our organization and our industry. Some of those are legislated. Actually, most of them are legislated, but through different paths. One would be, a wine marketing district is one of the discussions being had, where similar to a destination marketing organization like a convention and visitors bureau, a district is outlined, and an assessment from that particular outlined district is then put on. For example, either I know I just received a note from our local Traverse City Tourism about how there's a California region doing it on a percentage of sales. One that we have specifically been discussing has been about a particular assessment on glasses sold. Another opportunity could be, a colleague of yours in the House, Representative Pauline Wenzel, introduced HB 5270, which would ask for reappropriation of state excise tax that producers already pay into the general fund and be allocated towards particular wine industry initiatives. And then thirdly is, actually there's four. The third one would be licensing fees increase of winery licenses. And that is being discussed through the Michigan Wine Producers Association, who is the group that represents Michigan wine producers in Lansing. My understanding is that the licensing fees haven't been raised in probably 40 years, and that could contribute more to what's known as the Craft Beverage Council, and could be tailored in a way that would direct funds towards marketing Michigan wine. But it seems like something like that, the devil's in the details. The fourth way, of course, is a public act, a PA 232 checkoff program, where grape growers, much like cherries and asparagus and blueberries and apples, have an assessment based on tonnage that would be allocated from a particular group appointed by the governor, and this group would determine the uses and the assessment. So that's kind of a little bit of insight on where we stand in discussions. There's no clear silver bullet on how to provide funding in any way. So, but one of the themes that we constantly hear about in all of these discussions is that when it comes to determining legislation, for example, and I don't know if you can speak on this or not, that legislators are looking for quote unquote skin in the game from the industry. So is that something you'd be able to comment on?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, kind of generically speaking, I'm not so sure that that is what's going on here in this sort of situation or not. That I'm not, I guess, quite up to speed on if that's something that's affecting you guys. I mean, but in general, especially when funds are in question, when we talk about the appropriations process, that's something I've definitely noticed through numerous appropriation cycles on both the state and federal level. You know, when the legislature, whether that's the state or the federal legislature, is going to fund a project, you know, the best projects, what they're trying to do with those public dollars is to fund something that's going to have a legitimate and very foreseeable impact, positive impact, or solution to a problem. And it has to be something that is kind of, whether it's an actual construction project or something else, it needs to be essentially shovel ready, whether that means shovel ready in actual construction terms, or whether that means maybe for something like this in terms of the structure and the plan to implement and deliver funds properly to solve the problem. They want to see that the funds are going to be allocated and that the funds are going to be used properly within the time that they've been set to do. What they don't want to see is when they allocate funds and then we have projects that don't meet their metrics and those funds have to get kicked back to the state, or it doesn't quite solve the problem, and then they have to come and try to get another kick at the can or another dip in the well. Those are kind of those certainly have a negative look within those legislative circles. They want to solve the problems ideally, and that doesn't mean that it's impossible to get something that maybe would need additional steps. But again, I mean, in order to pursue something like that, the best strategy would be to have a really good plan that you can kind of sell in a way that you can pitch that shows like, look, yeah, we do have to come back for some more funding, but this is why we'll need to come back. This is how this is going to work, et cetera, et cetera. You need to have it really well built out. And in terms of like a wine marketing district, there's definitely some precedent that maybe could show this works. But, you know, there would have to be a lot of discussions and things to show that you really have this is going to be the impact. This is how it's going to solve the problem. If we're kind of looking at it like that, they want to see that that the organizations are just as invested in this and are pushing for this as the state would be if they were to publicly allocate dollars to our program.
Some folks that I've had discussions with feel like we have strength in numbers, and then some folks that I have discussions with feel like that there's a particular protocol in order to move legislation forward. And what I mean by that is the example of the Michigan Wine Producers Association. Michigan Wine Producers Association have a particular person that is our lobbyist. So does the wholesalers organization. And the way that that is seen or perceived is that this particular interest group pushes their motivations together, where the opposite side is that we gather, whatever the minimum amount of signatures is required to push our intent forward. Kind of unwrap that for us. How does that work? What would be a way to whichever cause or whichever lever that we feel is going to work for our industry? How should we move the line forward?
That's a great question. That kind of ties into, I kind of answer that a lot in different ways to constituents all the time, who are asking about what that budget process looks like, or legislation, or why policy takes so long to move. It takes forever to accomplish anything. I mean, that we all know and see frustratingly. It's a very slow process to pass legislation. And so people talk about that a lot. The power of the lobby corps, so to speak, kind of comes into play. And while there's definitely some negative perceptions to that, and there have been some bad examples in the past, I think that we can all probably come into our minds if we think about that. In a very general sense, though, and in almost all cases, it's not nefarious. There shouldn't be a negative connotation to working with the lobby corps, to having a lobbyist, or to engaging with those people, because essentially those individuals are just paid to be real experts in whatever industry they're representing. And each legislator, staff members, et cetera, that make up the office bring their sets of experiences, their life, their things that they've worked on. But we legislate on such a wide swath of issues. Hundreds of different things come across every week that are completely separate industries. And each member, my boss says it all the time, he can point to 2 or 3 different areas where he could probably talk top to bottom, knows them very well in and out. And those are things that he had a life in, his life before legislature. So when it's business, the film industry, a variety of other things there, he could talk those top to bottom. But when it comes to something more specific to an industry maybe that he hasn't had that experience in, that's where those lobbyists come into play. That's where the power of having those experts that take the time to come and build relationships with not just a member here or there, but work towards making sure that all members of the legislature understand that they're the person to go to, or at least one person to go to, if they have questions about a specific industry. So Nate Love, I think, is a great example of this with the producers. I believe he's with Wine Producers. He does an excellent work up here. And if we have questions about something that would relate to that industry, we would absolutely go and ask him for his opinion, since he spends time understanding, researching, knowing the ins and outs that, say, maybe we wouldn't understand as one group. And then there you have, of course, we're one of 38 and then 110 members that all have this same, maybe 3 or 4 have a background in, say, the wine industry specifically, and could really jump in on these issues and know all of the ins and outs that you guys know. But the majority won't, and will rely on that sort of input because they have built a trusted relationship. They know that they're not just going to advance personal interest. It's very, it's almost like a business transaction. There's not a transaction really, but it's an exchange of knowledge. And so having that's kind of the, I guess, the crux of a lot of this stuff. If you're looking at identifying which one of these is going to be the best and how do we move something forward, you guys are experts, absolutely. And the key is to really unify your voice and work with the other big industry stakeholders to kind of come to the closest thing to a consensus you can. I've said it in a way, you want to try to maximize the effectiveness of the policy to achieve what we want it to achieve here, while still maintaining its ability to pass. Because there is a wide range of circles, I guess, and unintended consequences that we wouldn't foresee. I'm not even speaking specifically to this. I wouldn't be able to tell you what they would be necessarily with my personal knowledge, but with any piece of policy, you enact a piece of legislation that seems to make a really positive impact in one area without realizing that it's actually going to negatively impact this group over here. And then they come out, and then sometimes you have to go back and fix it. And as we all know, that process is slow it's frustrating. And so that's why the process is so difficult to move things forward. Everybody wants to make sure that we're achieving what we're trying to achieve while making the least harm possible at the same time for other areas we may not have thought of. So I might have gotten a little off track, I guess, but trying to bring it back around. I mean, it's really important to work with and engage with the different stakeholders and their government relations teams, because those people have they're paid to, and they focus on building the relationships with the different members and the elected officials so that they can have those reassuring conversations, say, yeah, we're totally behind this. All the various groups that I represent, there's not going to be a negative impact here. Green light, go forward. And obviously you'll never get like 100%, or I will never say never, but it's very unlikely to ever have 100% of all impacted industries be positive. But again, that's okay. You can still pass legislation. It just, you try to get it as close to that as possible before you are able to really start moving that needle.
So are there certain programs that you might be able to recall that tend to see a higher success rate than others, especially from the ones that I've listed here?
So I don't have any personal, I can't recall seeing a specific part of one of these programs that you've listed, be necessarily a better idea than the others. I think some of these would potentially be easier to move forward because they have maybe a less negative impact on the other areas that would be pushing. So I'll give an example. I think you mentioned this earlier, like with the licensing fees piece. That one, it looks, and I could be misinterpreting this, so please do correct me with my limited knowledge here, but it looks like the ones that would essentially be having to make most of the compromise on the benefit would be the wine industry, as you guys would be kind of having to split those profits, I suppose, in a way with the other beverage councils. If you were to pursue that's how I'm reading it. I could obviously be wrong, of course, but if that's the case, then, and the other groups are already on board, and you guys come forward and say, hey, we just want to raise this up. We recognize that, we're the ones who are being we're not getting the total benefit that we'd like, but this will help everybody. There's no negative impacts out here. That if it's not going to have all those negative impacts that nobody's foreseeing, it has a higher chance of kind of moving through on its own. But that doesn't mean you can't take one of the other opportunities that if there's one that you feel benefits you better, and have some real conversations with some of these stakeholders, pull together, and I know you've talked with, I think, Nate, I think he's been on one of these before, pull together some of those individuals at the same time and sit down at a table and just talk about, or on a Zoom call, and start going over the ins and outs and finding those compromise pieces. And maybe together you can craft something that everybody is supportive of, and then bring that over to the legislature and say, hey, look, here's the idea, stakeholder, these guys all agree, and they're backing it. That makes it obviously something that is going to raise a lot less red flags in the back of people's minds, is going to raise a lot less concern about whether or not they're going to harm somebody unintentionally by pushing forward this bill package. So
yeah, thank you. For everyone that's on the call here, I just want to review some things that we learned in the past town halls. When we talk about the wine marketing district, at its nature, it seems like that there could be some buy-in. The things that are positives, in my opinion, on the wine marketing district is that you can make the borderline as small or as large as you want. So if you, for example, if Old Mission Peninsula, where Chateau Chantal is, wants to have a wine marketing district, we could do that specific to Old Mission Peninsula. Or, of course, in this case, what we're talking about is the entire state of Michigan. So there is flexibility there. The pushback that I have heard from the industry on that piece is that the successful properties will be carrying the weight of all of the recipients of the benefits. And I think we can see that reoccurring through other areas as well. Meaning that, we see probably 100,000 people in between Memorial Day and Halloween in our tasting room. So if we were to put an assessment on each glass sold, that would be a large share of the revenue that would be generated from that, as opposed to those that might be in other areas that aren't seeing that much traffic. So that is one of the pushbacks that we hear. Another pushback that we hear, for example, is with a checkoff program where there's an assessment on the smallest margin of the supply chain. So a PA 232 isn't very popular because of the revenue generated by the tonnage of grapes right now is certainly one that doesn't support a lot of the necessities that grape growers have. Another piece is this idea of reintroducing HB 5270, which is essentially, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, is a bill in the House that would, as I mentioned, reappropriate excise tax. And there's a lot of red flags on that already, just using the word excise tax from what I hear with our partners in the Wholesalers Association. But that piece would then be generating a new organization at MDARD, Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development, that is like the Grape and Wine Industry Council, which is in conflict with an already established Craft Beverage Council. And so my understanding there is that we would have an additional opponent with folks from the state that would feel like that we're duplicating a process that's already in place. And so what seems to be the path of least resistance, I'll say, is this licensing fee discussion, because it's equitable. It's one that could, raise all ships with whatever dollars were generated in. And the amount that I continue to hear in order to have shovel-ready programs, as Dakota has stated, is that we're looking at approximately about $500,000 that we need to generate as an industry. And that $500,000 would then open other solutions for us that could at least have a 2-to-1 return on that investment. So the intent here is to not only discuss how these things work, but to find a way to unlock some funding so that we can move our industry forward. And so that's the nature of this call. And so thanks for that soapbox moment. I just wanted to make sure that everybody on the call was up to speed on what we're talking about, because I do see a few new folks here. So what I heard you say, Dakota, is that certainly engaging people that are that have relationships with legislators is a good step. What about this piece where we're the United States of America, and if we all sign a petition and get behind it, we'll be able to push our intent through a certain channel? How does that particular lever work?
We're not talking like of just a ballot initiative, so to speak. We're talking more of just putting the weight of your joint industry as each individual member behind like a policy idea.
Correct.
Okay, yeah, that's also very effective. I want to make sure that I reiterate that too. I kind of alluded positively towards the lobby corps there, and that's because they're a positive resource. That's how most offices view the lobby corps down here, is they're just kind of they're a positive resource. They're helpful. They know what they're talking about. They're experts in their fields. So having them kind of backing you helps a lot in terms of reassurance for a lot of these different legislators that may or may not know the industry super well. That said, even just you guys together absolutely do hold very, very impactful weight. You are the experts in the industry. You're out there living it, doing the work. You care a lot about obviously seeing it succeed. And it's one of the very important industries in our state. So I don't think anybody would disagree with that whatsoever. So coming together and as an industry, kind of essentially lobbying for change is absolutely a strategy you can do, and it can be very effective. You'll need to make sure that if that's if you don't want to work with the different government relations groups and the lobby corps people, and you don't want to keep them in the loop, I mean, I would recommend at least having conversations with them, to try to make sure they're not going to be resisting or actively pushing against your legislation. That might not stop it depending on the policy, but it might depending on the policy. So, it's one of those things where having as many people looped into the discussions to build that strategy, to build that ask out is effective, but you can absolutely do it on your own. You can come out, you could come to Lansing and have like letters. You could send letters out, or deliver them to the members and explain that, this is a collaborative of statewide members of this industry that know what we're doing, and we really want to push for this. Please contact us or have set up those meetings and things. And you can totally do that. You'll be, I think at the end of the day, and I can't guarantee this, but I'm sure that as if legislation were to be moving forward that came, I mean, when legislation does move forward, it goes to committee and then that eventually goes up for a hearing. And what you'll probably see is those different other groups, all the different stakeholders, so to speak, whether that's the producers or the craft beverage council or whomever else would be involved. I'm just throwing out like names here that I can think of. Top hand, they're going to come out and testify, and there's going to be back and forth there, and those conversations are going to happen. So, that's where you absolutely can stand in essentially as your own lobby unit, and it would be effective. You can do that. But where I would, if I was trying to push something I cared about personally, I would be going to these groups and making sure I have as many on board as possible before I move forward, pushing the issue. Just to the path of least resistance will help make it move, because there's so many different issues that are legislated on. If it's a hammering controversial issue, it'll be much harder to get it to move through those committees and out for full votes and things like that. So the least resistance you can give to something, the better your odds are getting it through in one session, so to speak.
Yeah, I can see that makes sense with I'm sure there's hundreds of letters a day of folks trying to push initiatives through, and how to make sure that ours stands out and not get buried in those asks is certainly an important piece. So before I open the chat room up for questions, is there anything that we should know or be thinking about that crossed your mind, opportunities that maybe would be interest of the wine industry, or just in general guidance on when an industry like ours is looking to secure a funding mechanism through legislature? What are the best practices?
Sure. Yeah, and of course, this is one of those times where I do wish that my boss was able to be here to talk to you guys. He is a little bit more knowledgeable about the ins and outs, specifically because he's out there actively negotiating the budget right now as we stand. So he's very knowledgeable and would probably have some more insights to add on to what I would tell you. But building those relationships with the members that represent you and making sure that they understand the importance of your industry and the importance of the asks that you're pushing for is really essential. I mean, that's kind of the nature of what a lot of this is building those relationships to make sure that people trust what you're saying, that you have a personal connection to where you can come and have a seat at the table. And it's not hard to do. Everybody thinks that that's really, there's definitely a perception amongst at least the public that's definitely there that it's very difficult to engage and to sit with your member or your electeds. And it's not. My experience, even just getting involved, I ended up working for one I did not intend to. It was just, I was interested. I kind of volunteered a little bit. So sook out, if I'm pronouncing that right, a couple of different members and spoke to them. And one thing led to another, because there's a real desire to engage with each of you and to learn more and to understand the industry. Because at the end of the day, everybody down here is down here because they want to do they just want to do a good job. They want to make a positive difference in the state. Each individual member is here for those reasons. They don't want to, willy-nilly just be hurting industries or handicapping industries and things like that. So, they want to engage with you. So if you have, if you can build those relationships and they know that you're somebody they should call when something involving the wine industry or maybe even just the agriculture industry as a whole is coming across that they have questions about, that's how I would totally move forward is engaging with your local electeds. I know, what you guys are doing, the industry you represent. I don't think there would be many members of the legislature at all that would disagree with the importance of the wine industry in this state. I mean, especially Senator Damoose and the other members of the Hospitality and Tourism Caucus. This is a critical thing for us up here, especially in northern Michigan, as you know, Brian. But in general, our state has some of the best in the nation, and we want to highlight and promote that. I don't think anybody would disagree. So just building those relationships and approaching it there would be, start engaging with them personally and try to have a conversation. And then, again, it just kind of comes back to looping in those stakeholders, those other individuals, to make sure they're not going to resist what you're pushing on.
So what's the best way to engage those that are, they're creating policy when they're in Lansing, they're when they're on leave, they are, spending time with their families. Are there certain times of the year that are better for engagement? How far in advance? For example, at the end of July, we have a meeting down in Southwest Michigan of wine industry and grape growers. And I think it would be beneficial to everyone to have representation from our state districts at that particular function. What's the best way to engage representation to have them attend certain events like this?
Sure. Great question too. So I know most offices, and this could, there's a lot of different ways to do this, but you can reach out, and I'm telling you, when I say that, offices do actually see members do actually see the emails and things that come through their office, the phone calls, build a small relationship with that staff member that's taking, that, because we'll get hundreds and hundreds of emails every day. And most of them are just, typically just asks to vote a certain way or not vote a certain way on policy. So we'll respond to those. Meeting requests are kind of a different category. So just reach out and request to have a sit down or a phone call with your member. Explain, maybe you're a business owner in their district, and you'd like to just talk to them a little bit more about what you do and what your goals are, how they can be helpful to the industry. I would say more often than not, they're going to be willing and interested in having that discussion. Sometimes it takes time to schedule, depending on what's going on and how busy they are in their districts and things. And that's another thing to keep an eye out for. If they're ever doing some do town halls, some do coffee hours, different things like that. Those are really valuable. I mean, some of the best bills that we've seen, I know Senator Damoose talks a lot about one that happened in the House with like mental health and improving that space. That's an industry, the ins and outs of, he knew almost nothing about when he got started. And so, he was at a town hall meeting that or a coffee hour thing. A constituent came to him, explained her idea. He thought it was a great idea. Went back and started researching a little bit more about it. It turned into a bill, which turned into being the exact solution that she'd hoped it to be. So having that outreach, you just reach out to those offices and just, mention that you are a constituent, you'd love to talk to them, make yourself available and work with their schedule to set it up. I mean, it seems difficult, and it definitely can take some time to work out. These people are very busy, and it's not due to a lack of work. They're running around like crazy. I can attest to that. But they are always happy to sit and meet and talk. That's definitely something I would be shocked if they were unwilling to discuss.
And of course, they always have strong team players like you, Dakota, that are as willing to be present as well. Okay, so I think we can open up the floor here to some questions for Dakota Baker. If anybody has any specific questions, keep in mind that there are certain questions that Dakota may be able to address, and there may be some, but he'll guide us on which ones that he can address. And so if anybody has a question, please put it in the chat. All right. Not seen many on this particular topic. but I think we've got some good pieces to continue this conversation. And no matter what, it seems like the most important piece is to have an engaged industry, one that is willing to show up and be willing to do the work, which could be from time to time contacting local representation, because if we're not talking to them, they don't know, right? So I think there's an opportunity here that could be highlighted, and then finding particular mechanisms that what it sounds like to me is a mechanism that could be shovel ready is the term that we heard today. Something that has a solid plan in place. It could or could not have an example of the industry itself having skin in the game, as we're told, but definitely probably helps knowing that if we are willing to do the work ourselves, that's just a better representation of our industry when it comes down to deciding legislation. And then I think lastly, finding one that has minimal impact on the negative side. So it's not something that will be held up for a long time in debate. So any parting words, Dakota, before we get off the call here?
Yeah, actually, just to add on to a tiny little bit of that, and I think you summarized it pretty well. The add-on I would say too, finding something that has the least negative impact, it helps for sure. But like, let's say, one of these other ideas that you have, you guys are really psyched about, and you feel this is really the best course of action. It can still be done, but you want to make sure, that's why I want to really reiterate, you don't have to necessarily go through those different stakeholders, government affairs people, or anything like that, but you want to work with them, bring them to the table, compromise, find creative solutions to the problems they may have with your policy, so that path of least resistance is you can make that path of least resistance working with these people. So, engaging with those different stakeholders, those different groups, to make sure that is the case. That's the best thing to keep in mind as you advance. And I just wanted to also reiterate too, the squeaky wheel does get the grease. The process to move any policy, even if it's quite simple, is long. I mean, there are examples on examples I could go into of bills that probably all of us would wonder why there's even a holdup, and the random unforeseen circumstances that have created blockages on bill packages. So it takes time, but just be tenacious and don't, engaging with your members and their staff is really the key. I mean, you want to make sure you build those relationships and move it forward that way. And the squeaky wheel gets the grease. I'm going to reiterate that one more time. It may seem crazy, but when we see, as a staffer, when we see the same name coming through, we're gonna remember that name. And it doesn't have to be aggressive. It doesn't even have to be constant, but just keeping the follow-up moving along, it does help.
Okay. I think I'm going to check the chat one more time here, and I do not see any follow-up questions. So, Dakota, thank you so much for your time today. Appreciate you joining us and kind of educating us on processes on how to move things forward in legislature. And I'm sure that there are folks on this call from the district 37, and you may see more of this coming through your email box. But certainly in good faith effort to try to move the Michigan wine industry forward. I think that's the most important piece here, is that we are at a pivotal time in our industry where we as an industry know that we are creating world-class wine to be set on par of other wine regions. And now it's time for other people to learn about it. And that's what we're trying to do through research, education, and marketing, so that we can push that buck forward and be in the conversation as many of our peers. So thanks to everyone. Thank you, Dakota. Thank you, Michigan Wine Collaborative, for joining. And everyone have a wonderful day. Oh, whoa. 2 chats. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Goodbye now.
Thank you.